thank you both for, I just briefly introduce everyone. Thank you very much for finding time. I know we are limited on time, so I'll make it quick. So I'll just ask 2 questions. How many years have you been doing it, and if you have done other martial arts?
I'm a brown belt. I've been doing jiu-jitsu for almost 11 years. Other martial arts, not really. Yeah, a little bit of wrestling, but...
I'm a second-degree black belt. I've been doing jiu-jitsu close to 20 years. Martial arts in general, over 30. Taekwondo, tiny bit of judo, some jeet kune do, Aikido, boxing, Thai boxing, Wing Chun, a whole bunch of different kinds of stuff, a little smattering of all sorts of stuff.
Well, just on the record, if this is the first video that somebody is watching on my channel, I did Aikido for 14 years. I received a 3rd-degree black belt, which is much easier than Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I did a little bit of Wing Chun, but not much aside that. So Aikido is my main realm. I just started learning BJJ and MMA. So for everyone, we're going to watch 2 different videos, and we'll break them down as much as you're inspired. So, again, this is the grandson of the founder of Aikido. He is a representative of something which would be called a post-war Aikido version, which was becoming more and more soft, kind of circular. You'll see all these things, but basically he's a representative of more soft Aikido, but at the same time, it's the most spread Aikido in the world. What are your expectations?
I mean, I've seen enough Aikido that I probably know what to expect. My coach always gives wise advice to watch the feeder and not the guy doing the technique. And usually that's what I do the first couple of times through, and that'll tell me most of what I need to know. And then, second or third time through, I can actually watch the guy doing the technique, and it's easier for me to understand what's going on that way.
It's a great point. So even like for the viewers, to watch the attacker, to focus on the attacker, not just on the...
Or watch it one time focusing on the attacker, and then one time focusing on the feeder, and that'll tell you a lot of what you need to know, I think.
Well, it's interesting. It says, it is our duty to pass on the beauty of Aikido to the next generation, which is already an interesting point, that not like practicality or not like the self-defense. So any comments? Quick.
Well, I mean, it's quite choreographed. I mean, I don't have to see very much of that movement to know the attackers being extremely cooperative if this were a confrontation. And I can tell by the way he's stepping and making adjustments with his feet that he's done all this, probably this exact pattern, many times before.
Well, it's really beautiful to watch, because the more impressive person to me is the feeder and not the attacker.
Yeah.
Because the feeder you can watch, and he knows exactly what's happening and how to move his body to make these beautiful, gorgeous flips and falls. And if my assumption, and I haven't seen this guy do it to, if he did this same sort of thing to a brand new person walking in off the street, I would think it would not look as elegant. It might be much worse for the feeder, but it wouldn't look as beautiful and elegant as this. And so I think there's an element of choreographed cooperation here that makes it look really gorgeous, and it is beautiful to watch. Again, if you look at what the feeder's doing, most of what he's doing is cooperating with the attacker's movements in order to fall and move in a really beautiful way, like dancing. It reminds me of really beautiful dancing.
Right. I mean, it's heavy on the art and less on the martial.
Very quick question before I go to the next chapter. This pin, it's a pin. Very common in Aikido. It's called Nikio. It's the second pin. There's like 6. I know that it's flawed, but just like looking at it, do you see something or like maybe or?
Well, I'm less impressed. Let's say that they arrived here through a confrontational process. And all I saw was this. I'm less impressed with how the arm is being held than the fact that somehow I ended up above someone who's face down. That's actually super awesome. That's
if that would happen, right?
Checkmate. So if this happened in a real confrontation, the upright gentleman did something amazing.
Right. I've seen a lot of grappling matches with wrestlers, judo guys, jiu-jitsu, all sorts of different kinds of people. I've never seen this happen in a way that would work. And I would assume that anybody in jiu-jitsu at high blue belt or above if you put them in this position, it would not, it would not work out as a tap. It just wouldn't happen.
Now I can. That's super easy to fix. So this is just half a step from the lawman's Kimura.
Right.
So as soon as he attaches the wrist to the lower back, that's just like putting the handcuffs on something.
And that's the interesting part, is that because it's very cooperative, you know, that the gentleman on top could have done this technique tens of thousands of times, and he doesn't know that, you know, if he took his knee and then put it over the back of the other guy's knee, he would have a stronger connection in pin, and the other guy wouldn't be able to move in a way to relieve the pressure. And then I'm not sure which one John is talking about, but it sounds really cool. But it would just take a little bit of uncooperativeness from the bottom person over multiple times, and then, you know, he would figure it out, because that's what the opponent process does, is you get a little bit of resistance in the right way, and you could start from this position and say, let's try it. And then what would you do to defend it? And then slowly over time, working with your partner with some resistance, you'd figure it out, and you'd probably come up with 5, 6, 7 great transitions from this position. If you were, like John, lucky enough to happen to get to that spot, how would you actually turn it into something useful? And I think that's where it breaks down, is the person on the bottom's cooperating and lying still until the arm gets tweaked, and then he taps.
That's such a great point. You mentioned the opponent process. It's like, and that's what I had with Aikido. I practiced those, and I think you mentioned, John, like, you can see that it's practiced thousands of times, and there's kind of a mastery there. But I went through years of that practice, but eventually, as soon as I got in a role sparring with a blue belt in BJJ, I had nothing would come up, because it's just like, he wasn't playing the game, he wasn't feeding me. And I love the point you said, that if the process would be introduced, things would be figured out. But it's funny, it doesn't happen, and it's not figured out. So, you know.
Right.
To save our time, I'll move on to just one more chapter in this video, which is called Suwariwaza. So this is kneeling techniques, and they're both kneeling. They're both doing the techniques as kneeling. Obviously, I think the dynamics are the same. It's cooperative. I find it interesting that it's on the knees. Quite a bit of flexibility and various other things necessary here. We'll move on in a second to what's called Hani Handachi, which is the one person's kneeling on the ground, the other one is standing and attacking, which is, again, part of the curriculum of Aikido.
But, you know, you could see the same sort of stuff happening here, well, in both the kneeling and this one, where if you watch the feeder, there's a level of cooperation, and you could see it much more so on the kneeling one, where at a certain point he was laying flat on his back, kind of waiting for the tap to happen. And a jiu-jitsu person would never lay flat, sort of prone with arms and legs out, kind of waiting for the tap to happen. They would be moving and scrambling and shrimping, and you see it there. It is right there. Yeah. And so that doesn't happen in a live roll ever. It just doesn't happen.
You know, and I'm less interested, now that I've watched even more of this, of critiquing pieces about Aikido's techniques, or its, what I'd call its tactics here. I'm more interested in, why do you have a curriculum where both people are on the knees? I mean, I know why a lot of jiu-jitsu gyms start people, especially like blue belt and below, from, hey, if we're just rolling, everybody start from your knees, because it reduces injuries. But I can tell injuries is not something I would be worried about doing this. So what is the curriculum from the knees?
I think that's one of the downsides of Aikido, is that it's quite attached to its cultural roots. And in Japan, that's one of the main explanations, which I just got passed on, so hopefully it's true. In Japan, it's one of the few countries, or maybe the only country, which had a ethical way of sitting, which was on the knees. And when the samurai were there, like having your sword, there was a chance that somebody just goes next to you, and while you're sitting on the knees, he's going to attack you. And so that culturally, that kind of went even up to this day, where it used to be functional, or that used to make sense. Now, well, in Japan, maybe if you're sitting drinking sake, the other justifications, and I tend to call them justifications versus explanations, because I think it may be like just trying to say, well, that's the reason, just trying to come up with something. Okay. And I think mainly the justifications is, which may be true, but basically it's using your hips of hip work, coordination. Like in Aikido, it's the using your hips is very much emphasized in regular training, stand-up. So the idea is if you can do that while you're on the ground, you will have to use your hips and you will engage them more. So that's, I think, the best justification that I came to it. But I'm not sure if everybody says that.
Yeah.
I think most people are just doing it just because.
Yeah.
So, does that make sense?
It makes sense. It's one of those. Maybe some of it is being essentially a new world martial art is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and even as it's come to the United States, there's a lot of realism in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's about, well, what does someone actually do in this situation? Well, they kind of attack like this. Okay, well then let's learn to deal with that specific way that somebody attacks, not a hypothetical where, well, we have this culture where people used to sit on their knees when they were samurai, and but again, it looks beautiful.
It does, yeah. Well, just a tiny bit before I skip to the next video. It's multiple attackers, just so you would have a taste of how that.
This is a great one for watching the feeders.
Right. They're just really grabbing stand.
And watch what they do. So just watch the feeders, and then they're beautifully cooperative, beautifully cooperative, and it looks really gorgeous. And so I would have to describe what I see of Aikido is this beautifully cooperative martial art where both people know their role really well, and at the higher levels, both the feeder and the person doing the technique are perfectly choreographed, doing their part. There it is, and you can see it there, and it's cool. It's really beautiful to watch, but without the opponent process, everything falls apart, and you don't really know what works and what doesn't. And what I see that's problematic is people defending Aikido by picking certain specific techniques and saying, well, this works, and the reason you're not pulling it off is because you're not doing it right, and if you knew how to do it right, then you could pull it off, or here's how I would do that and it works, or I pulled that off in a real fight, or I know somebody who pulled it off in MMA, and all of that's really besides the point, because it really is about the training process and the opponent process, and if you don't have that in, then sure, you're going to find people who do all kinds of interesting, weird stuff in street fights or MMA fights or bar fights, or people will pull off everything, but if you want something that works consistently over time, and you want to know, and I want to know if what I'm doing works, you have to have an opponent process, and you have to try it against a resistant opponent who's trying not to let you pull it off. And if you can do that, and you know how to do that in a safe, effective way, then it works. And then we're not really having an argument about whether or not Aikido techniques work or not, because that's kind of getting bogged down in the weeds, I think.
But the interesting moment here, fascinating for me, is that so many people consider like pre-war was more like rough, and then Aikido people, some argue like, oh, this new, what I showed, people call it Aikikai, it's like, oh, it's watered down, it's not realistic, you have to look at the old stuff, that's the real Aikido, that's the one which works. But then I'm going to show it to you. So this was one of the main students of the founder. He was a third dan in judo back in the day. It's like 1931, so I think it's like Jigoro Kano was still very much around.
It has a different flavor,
right?
And so you can see the flavor, but the feeder here is really incredible. And what I see with the feeder is he's just less elegant than the feeders in the newer style of jiu-jitsu. And if you had a special effects person sort of erase out the person doing the technique so you could only see the feeder, then you would see what was actually going on here. And just watch him. I mean, he is.
Yeah. So I noticed right away his chin and his shoulders are in front all the time. So that's like if I wanted to teach somebody how to be knocked out, I'd say go pick a fight with this person and make sure your hips are back and your chin and your chest is forward.
Right.
And that person doesn't know how to hit you, but you will get knocked out.
Wow, that's a great point.
So again, I don't want to spend a bunch of time talking about how Aikido techniques are no good, but I would spend a lot of time doing that if I kept watching.
Right.
I shouldn't say no good, because I can't gauge enough here, because it's so It's so crazy.
Well, I mean, and the thing is, it's easy to find out. And so all you really need to do is get 1, 2, or 3 jiu-jitsu blue belts,
Right.
put them on a mat with somebody doing Aikido and say, let's try it out and see what happens. And then you would know. And that's just the opponent process. And so you don't have to argue on Facebook or YouTube comments or anything else. You really just can find out.
Yeah.
And so in this day and age, it's not that hard to do. And you would find that probably most jiu-jitsu gyms would be fairly accommodating of an Aikido person who came in and said, hey, I really want to know, can we try this out? And if you came in and you were really respectful about it and you wanted to know, then they would accommodate you. And we've done that at more in the old days and not so much anymore, but we've had people come in who want to know and then they find out.
I do see with this gentleman, even though I'd say 90% of this video is crazier than the other video. But I do see a few movements that he does and some of the throws where I think, oh, yeah, that could be timed and could be made effective. This stuff where he just pushes 2 people to the ground, I don't think so.